Good, thank you. I'm looking forward to trading places with you.
Absolutely. So without any further ado, by the way, Zoltan is somebody I know virtually for quite some time. We're excited about the same kind of things, about startups, about productivity, about growth. And today he will tell us more about how do you grow internationally. But Zoltan, why don't you come and just share with us how do we get there?
Great, thank you very much. I guess about 2 years ago, I had the opportunity to chat with a guy named Peter Halachi, who's the co-founder and CTO of Prezi, a global software company that originated in Hungary. And he told me the story about when he realized that he had actually had to rethink the way he approached the whole building of his business in order to become a global company. You see, Prezi had gotten a pretty significant investment from a VC investor in the US, and they were encouraged to move closer to the customer. So they moved the founder, Peter, and some Hungarian engineers to Silicon Valley. And they had this first meeting where they met with the US engineers they had hired in the meantime, and they were faced with some typical product development problem. And the US engineers opened the conversation with the question, so how do we solve this problem? At which point all of the Hungarian engineers listed all the reasons why this was an impossible problem to solve. And so the clash of cultures began, and the battle lines were drawn, and in fact, it was clear at that point that in order to build a global company, you had to really rethink a broad range of the business, including the organizational culture. So there are very few things that are certain in the startup world. Two of them I've come to realize are that first, startups are fundamentally prepared to go global, right? They're software businesses, they're technology driven, they're in the business of going big. The second thing is that most founders are quite ambitious, right? They dream big, they want to grow into something meaningful so they can have a meaningful impact on the world. So it's an interesting question then, why is it so few startups are actually capable of growing into global companies? And I think the problem lies somewhere in the fact that no matter how committed you are to building a global company, it requires you to rethink a broad range of elements of your business, from your product development to your sales and marketing to, yes, your organizational culture, and it requires you to move outside of your comfort zone and to build credibility in parts of the world that you might not even understand or know or have any connection with. So I've had the pleasure of growing about a dozen companies into global businesses, some of them during my corporate career, some of them as an entrepreneur, some of them as an angel investor. And I think the conclusion that I've come to after this much experience is that really there are kind of three fundamental things that have to be in place to be able to build an international business. First, you have to have a very clear focus. You have to be able to reduce the amount of effort and time and resources you have to really emphasize one specific objective, one specific goal. The second is that you really have to have a range of clear sales and marketing messages in place, packaged in professional sales and marketing materials that can speak to audiences around the world. And third, you have to be able to execute in a way to deliver quick wins so that you can gain momentum and build traction. And so what I'd like to do today is to talk to you about sort of three critical areas that you should be thinking about if you are thinking about building a global business. The first, I want to talk about why it makes sense to go global and when is the right time to start thinking about this. Then I want to talk to you about what is the planning that you need to get in place in order to ensure yourself or set yourself up for success. And finally, I want to touch a little bit on a very specific execution blueprint that I've applied in my own career, that I've taught to multiple startup founders in the business-to-business tech space, and that they've used to build internationally successful businesses. Whatever it is that you hear from me today, my hope is that you will get a bit of inspiration and information that will help you be more successful into building a global company. And that goes for not just what I'll be talking about today, but to the panel discussion that we'll be having after my presentation. So, before I get started, just a few words of introduction so you understand the context of what I'll be talking about. My name is Zoltan Vardy. I'm a business growth mentor, and I work and support business-to-business tech founders to help them accelerate their revenue growth and scale globally by applying a business development framework I've created called the Launch Code. This sort of 9-step framework gives a clear blueprint for startup founders to build an international business in a meaningful way by helping them focus, sell, and manage their business appropriately. All of this system is based on my 30-year career, 20 years of which I spent in the corporate world, 10 years as an entrepreneur, investor, and advisor. I was responsible at one point for over a $600 million revenue business as head of global sales for NBC Universal, based out of London. But I've also been a startup founder sitting in an empty flat, writing my business plan and hoping to build something big. So I understand both sides of the coin when it comes to building a company. So now that I've spent a little time convincing why it's so difficult to build a global business, let me tell you why you should do it anyway. And there are really 3 fundamental reasons it makes sense to think global. The first is going global basically is your motor for growth. It enables you to take a valuable and a valid product or service applied to a clear market and to expand it into new territories. That means that you can actually accelerate your growth by selling the same thing to the same type of person in a different market. You can often do it at a significantly higher price without necessarily investing any more time or resources or energy. It also enables you to spread your risk and spread your costs across a broader space of markets. This is important because though we live in a global economy, as we've experienced in the last couple of years, truly there are differences in growth and development in different parts of the world, and you can actually balance your risk by having a foot in multiple geographies. And finally, it's a great way to attract fantastic talent. The best people want to work for global companies. They want to build internationally significant businesses. And so your ability to build a global business will ensure that you actually attract the best people to your company. It's, of course, a question of where you start this process. And I think there are a number of different launch pads, so to speak, but the 2 that I find that are most common are these 2. The first is what I would call day one global companies. These are largely product-led, technology-driven companies with a focus on attracting inbound customers. There's no general geographic focus. They speak to everybody around the world, but there tends to be some regional traction, some ability to break through and speak to clients in particular geographies around the world. These companies are typically ones that really start as global businesses and try to scale in that capacity. One example, a client of mine, they're called Syndicast. It's basically a platform that connects music publishers with with radio stations around the world. Works very well and has scaled very quickly. A second type of starting point is what I would call a market-by-market approach. This is where you actually are present in a single market. Normally, I would expect this to be an enterprise sales or direct sales-driven company. This company normally has some sort of product market fit in their own area of expertise, in their own home market, and they're looking to export that into other markets in the same way. They normally would do it one at a time based on some strategy. A typical example of this type of company, a client of mine called Logic School, they're basically a coding school for kids and teens that have a franchise system. They built it in one particular market and have now expanded in over 100 locations around the world with this market-by-market approach. No matter how you go about starting this process, one thing is for sure, you have to be international capable from day one. What I mean by that is you should be building your product already with the capabilities of being deliverable in local languages, in multiple languages. You should select a name that makes sense in multiple markets, easy to understand, especially in English language speaking markets. You should be looking at attracting people who bring that international cultural sensibility from day one in the organization, because it's going to create a bigger opportunity for you when you actually execute your strategy. When you do that, though, you should focus on creating what I would call your business foundations first. That means having a clear value proposition. What problem are you solving, in what way, for who, and why are you better than the competition? You should have your product offering clear. What is it that you're actually selling from a business model, pricing, and packaging standpoint that your customers can say yes to easily? And finally, make sure that your message is very much client-focused, not me-focused, and it clearly and explicitly states what problem you solve and why your target customer should take action to take advantage of that particular solution that you're offering. In addition to such practical elements, make sure that you are absolutely committed in mind, body, and spirit. Building a global business is a difficult path to follow, and you have to be committed to go through the ups and downs associated with it, probably even more than if you were just building a smaller business in your home market. If you're not ready to build a global business in your head, then you won't be able to do it in practice. Once you've created the foundations for your business, it's important to plan appropriately, really with two objectives in mind. First, you should be putting all of your energy into creating a clear focus for your international expansion. What are the territories, what are the industries, what are the methodologies you'll be using in order to begin your international expansion? The second is you should be focused on creating all of the tools necessary to build credibility. And I think that's one of the biggest obstacles for any company when they go out of their home market, is they have to seem like credible partners to people in different parts of the world that may not be relevant for them, or they might not have a network in or contacts, when they simply have to come off as credible business partners. So to do this, there's two things that you should be doing. First is define your geographic focus. Obviously, we're sitting here in Poland, in a Central European country. There's a general inclination for companies in this part of the world to think of themselves as being, a relevant player in the Central European region. I think this is a double-edged sword, because on the one hand, it might seem familiar to you and feel comfortable. On the other hand, it also is a lot of work to potentially enter into a very small international market. So you might be better off putting that energy into actually going into a much more significant Western European market, whether it's Germany or France or the UK, markets where if you can actually build traction, it gives you a huge leg up in terms of your overall international expansion opportunities. The United States is, of course, the holy grail of startup world. Any company that can create a meaningful presence in the United States is going to find that their credibility, their interest from investors, from customers is going to grow dramatically. It does come at a price financially, but at a price in terms of commitment as well, because making it big in the US is not a small proposition. The rest of the world, whether it's Latin America or Asia, I found tends to be more opportunistic from a business development perspective. Very few companies in this part of the world will focus on those markets, but they might have some incoming interest that will get their feet wet or get their interest going in those markets. In addition to the geographic focus, I think ultimately you have to make a decision based on three parameters. What are the available resources that you have, whether it's people, money, other resources, time, for instance. What is the competitive landscape? What are the other companies in your space doing? Are they leaving empty spaces, so to speak, in the market that you can fill? Or do you want to go head-to-head with them because you believe you've got a much better proposition? This is an important perspective. And finally, wherever you think that there is a significant potential from existing clients, existing relationships from one market, which you can then transfer into other markets, again, a great opportunity to create some basic parameters for your international expansion. In order for you to make a meaningful impact internationally, though, I think there's a great saying. It says, you only get one chance to make a first impression. And I think this is a very important piece of advice for any startup looking to go out of its home market. You have to create a professional image in a broad capacity of sales and marketing materials, from your website to your sales presentation to your one-pager. They should be written in English, in proper English. They should be presented professionally. There's nothing worse than sending a document to, let's say, a French partner or a UK partner full of English language mistakes, poorly designed. Is just going to basically sweep you off the table. There's nothing you're going to do afterwards to build credibility. Take some time to do this right. Make sure that you create a team and an organization that's capable of implementing an international strategy. Sales and marketing expertise might seem obvious, but for many tech-driven founders, there's a thing that, well, if you build it, they will come. As far as I'm concerned, that happens maybe 1 in a million times. You can't build a strategy on that, back of that. You have to have a strong sales and marketing focus in order to expand your business into international markets. If you don't have that among the founders, you have to bring people on board who are capable of filling that gap in the organization. Make sure that your business is already culturally scalable. What I mean by that is, for instance, what language do you use in your internal communication between people? It might be a good idea to start using English from day one, just to get people used to communicating in what is effectively the global language of business. English language skills on themselves, on the surface, are critical. I had one client I worked with whose CEO, they were in the automobile industry. They had organized a meeting with the Ford Motor Company in the United States. The CEO didn't speak very good English, though he had the chief engineer do the pitch. no offense to the engineers in the room, but they aren't necessarily always the best salespeople. And so you ended up having good English with poor sales skills. And the CEO effectively lost the opportunity to do business with a really significant partner because he just couldn't sell what he had to say to a potential partner. What's also important is to prepare yourself for the question, if somebody hears about me and they put my name into Google, what are they going to find? Being visible, being found is absolutely critical if you want to build an international business. And if you are found, what they find about you should be consistent with the brand and the messaging that you're creating. You should have social media profiles on LinkedIn and Facebook at a very minimum that reflect the messaging that you want to get out to your potential customers. Make sure that you're going to various conferences, exhibitions, for instance, like the one we're at here today, where you can meet with potential partners face-to-face, build credibility, and build a presence so that you start being considered a player in whatever industry that you are active in. And finally, don't underestimate the value of public relations. When they do that Google search, are they going to find maybe you in a podcast, an article, a blog, any sort of third-party support and consideration that gives you this idea of credibility among potential partners is all important. So I've talked about why and when you should go global. I've talked about the planning that you go through. I now want to talk a little bit about the execution blueprint that you can use. Now, there's no hard and fast rule for how to do this. I've developed a business development approach that has worked for me and has worked for multiple business-to-business tech startups in different industries, in different countries, all with the objective of creating a clear path to getting that first deal in place so that you can really start building traction and getting a quick win. I'm going to take you through this step by step just to give you some ideas to think about for your own business. First is build relationships and insights. There's a saying, get a lay of the land. What that means is if you've focused, let's say, on entering the German market, you should be getting a sense of what's going on in that marketplace, who the players are, who the competitors, who the investors, who the customers are, who the agents are that you can do business with. You can use your existing network to get introduced to that marketplace, but you can also attend conferences and exhibitions in that market to meet people who are active in whatever market you want to end up in. This is critical because, again, you want to get firsthand information about what's going on in the marketplace and find the proper value proposition, product offering, and client messaging that you can create to start building a clear path towards doing business. Make sure that you spend some time after this identifying the partners and the clients you want to work with. Explore partnerships in a range of different segments. So there's 3 types that I would recommend you think about. The first is the wholesaler-reseller relationship. Are there companies out there that can buy whatever it is that you're selling in bulk and then resell it without you having to put a lot of effort into the follow-on sales? Are there intermediaries or gatekeepers, I call them, that are representing multiple types of companies that are your target customer? As I work with many startups, oftentimes my gatekeepers or my partners are the venture capital firms who have large portfolios of startups who are looking for business development support of the type that I offer. So building relationships with venture capital firms is an important part of my sales strategy, for instance. And then there are finally agents and distributors and franchisees. These are ultimately the local players who are going to be your feet on the ground, who can offer you a local presence that is going to be meaningful and relevant and will give you that traction that you need in order to create a business in a particular market. Once you've done this, also make sure that you are targeting customers directly. Don't just sell through third parties because you have to have a direct contact with potential customers so you understand their problems and make the adjustments to your value proposition, to your offering, to your messaging so that they really resonate with your end customer in a meaningful way. I only believe you can do that as if you do that directly. Ultimately, of course, you can scale through third parties, but you have to do the hard work at the beginning yourself. Once you get to this stage, this is where it becomes fun, right? You close your first deal. Your first deal, I think, could be one of 2 things. It could be a partner deal, in which you actually develop a relationship with one of those 3 categories of partners I described, and they are able to represent you in some meaningful way in a new marketplace. Use this as an opportunity to test the business model that you've created. Use this as also an opportunity to do it without giving exclusivity. So one of the clients I worked with, a medtech company, had a big partnership opportunity in the United States. They ended up entering an exclusive agreement with a US-based company without really demanding anything in return. And what they ended up doing is spending 12 months waiting for the American partner to take action on their behalf It locked out any other meaningful relationships in that marketplace, and because it ended up delivering nothing, they ended up losing very valuable time early on in their development. Don't fall into that mistake. Don't get married before you date a little bit, because I think at the end of the time, this is too important to pass up. You also want to create your first paying customer relationship, which is, of course, critical. Great opportunity to test your process. How do you deliver whatever it is that you're selling? How do you learn and adapt to the feedback you're getting from your first paying customer to make sure that next time it's a smoother, it's a more enjoyable customer experience? Nothing ever works perfectly the first time. That's just part of life. You need to be able to have that relationship in place so you can start testing this. Once you've done this, there is a point at which you simply have to establish a local market presence. You can't build business from a distance forever. Now, the level and the depth of this relationship will depend entirely on your circumstances, but there are different things you can do. You can get a part-time consultant or representative to represent yourself in that particular market. You can hire full-time employees or employees, obviously, getting them onto your team and to represent whatever it is you're doing. And perhaps the most meaningful commitment that you can make is to actually, as a founder, go to that new market and be there and sell the idea and the vision that you're building, just as, in my example, Peter Halachi did with Prezi so many years ago to build Prezi into a global company. Don't forget that ultimately direct sales is limited. You have to support it with meaningful marketing, inbound marketing, of course, in general. This means content marketing. This means advertising. Supporting the distribution of your key messages to your target customers is critical. Again, taking part in conferences and exhibitions is a great way to spread the message, as is putting some time into developing media and public relations with relevant platforms and media outlets. And then finally, as you go through this process, make sure you do it with clear goals in mind. Decide early on what it is you want to achieve from this type of process, and track your progress. Look at the KPIs, look at your conversion rates, look at your customer acquisition costs, all of the numbers that are going to help you decide whether what you're doing is effective or ineffective, so that you can ultimately make decisions not based on gut feeling, but on data and results. Make adjustments then as needed, whether it's in your product or value proposition, whether it's the sales channels you're using or the partners you're doing business with, or whatever communication and messaging you're using. These are all things that are not going to be perfect from day one, but as you build the business and get traction, you'll be able to create a clear and meaningful business in whatever market you've decided to build in. So with that, I want to summarize some of the key takeaways from my presentation before we get into the panel discussion. First and foremost, you want to be a global business because effectively it's the best way to scale your business. It's how you will be able to become bigger and more meaningful in whatever industry that you're in. Before you do so, though, make sure you set the foundations. Make sure your value proposition, your product offering, your client message is very clear. And even if it's not perfect, even if you haven't achieved product market fit, it's close enough so that you can start meaningfully growing your business on a global scale. Make sure you spend time building your focus and building credibility. Decide which markets you want to enter. Decide which verticals you want to attack first. You can't be everything to everybody because then you're nothing to nobody. Make sure you focus your efforts and your messaging, and make sure you have the necessary tools in place to build credibility with potential partners. And then finally, use the opportunity to execute, to learn. And when you close that first deal, make sure that you learn from it and you revise as necessary to make it a scalable process in the future. If you would like a copy of my presentation, please send an email to zoltan.vardy@me.com. Just write Wolf Summit in the subject line, and I'd be happy to share it with you today. And if you do, I'd be also happy to sign you up to my list so you can get access to my latest articles, videos, podcasts, whatever it is that will provide you with valuable information to help build your business. So thank you very much for your attention. Thank you. I would like to, at this stage, ask the panel members to join. One of them is physically present here. The other two will be joining online. So if you just give me a minute, I have to get my cheat sheet here. So I have the proper... Yeah, so I have the proper information. Okay, so I would first like to invite Karolina Wilk-Trijanowska on stage. Karolina, please take a seat there. And I'll go over my panel leadership position here. Carolina is the COO and head of acceleration at Reactor X, which is a pre-acceleration program based in Warsaw for first-time founders, but it's also open for international founders. So welcome, Carolina.
Thank you for inviting me.
Absolutely. Hopefully we have online Zsuzsa Keshmar. We'll see Zsuzsa and Peter, I guess. So Zsuzsa is, there she is. Hi, Zsuzsa.
Hi there. Hi, everyone.
Okay, unfortunately I can't hear her, but hopefully we'll do that soon. So Zsuzsa is the co-founder and CMO and head of partnerships at Ontavo. She's listed by Forbes as one of Europe's top 100 female founders in tech. Ontavo is an enterprise loyalty program cloud with a presence globally in Europe, Asia Pacific, and North America. And Ontavo does business with really blue chip companies around the world, BMW, Bayer, Benetton, Kathmandu, and other global names. So welcome, Zsuzsa. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, I hope that you can hear me.
Yes, we can hear you now. Thank you very much. And finally, last but not least, Peter Tansos. Peter is the managing partner at Euroventures. It's a Budapest-based and long-established leading private equity and venture capital firm in Central Europe. They have had a proven ability to achieve international exits over 3 decades. They've invested in over 50 businesses, and many of them include recently exited Trezorit, AutoHop, EPAM, IND, just a few of the successful exits that Peter and his team have overseen. So welcome, Peter. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you. Hello, everyone.
Absolutely. So it's not a coincidence that these 3 people are sitting here. They're all people that I've had a personal relationship or a professional relationship with over the last decade or so, and they each represent a different perspective on this concept of global scaling. Obviously, Carolina here is representing the accelerator point of view, picking up companies at an early stage and leading the path for international expansion. Zsuzsa, as a startup founder, has lived through the ups and downs of global scaling, and I'm sure she'll have plenty of things to share on that. And Peter, of course, with the investor perspective, can provide some context there as to what has been useful and what has been successful in the companies that Euroventures has been involved with. So starting us off, Zsuzsa, maybe my first question to you, when was the first time you believed that you could build a global company?
We actually believe this from day one. And I think it's a great thing that if you start off early in your career to be a startup founder or a company founder, you have the bliss of ignorance. You don't know what you don't know, and you have all the confidence in the world. And I think this is what happened to us too. So when we started off, we thought that this will be a success. It will be an exit after 2 years, and then we will make a lot of money and so on. But well, it's been some years now. So we are, and it feels still right now that we are just starting off. Things are just getting better every day. And it feels that tomorrow will bring an even better challenge and even better results. And we still think that we can build a global company, but in fact, we are already building it.
Okay. Peter, from an investor perspective, do you want founders to want to build a global business from day one, or would you prefer to have them have a solid foundation of business wherever they are and then to expand at a later stage? What's your point of view?
I think I liked the way you presented different kinds of companies. And I think different kinds of companies have a different answer to that in my mind. Certainly, I like companies with a clear product driven business model to want to become global from day one. And if you are a company building an enterprise solution, I think you need very strong kind of proof of case presence in a market. So in the latter case, I would rather wait until they prove their concept before I believe that they can go global.
I see. And can you give an example of, let's say, a company that you've invested in each of those scenarios that delivered some meaningful success?
Definitely. You just named one of them. A more recent example in our portfolio is Trezorit, a company which started from an apartment building in Budapest by 3 talented university students who had a great encryption technology for which they actually were looking for a business model, how to turn it into a company. And with the help of a couple of business angels, the idea was to turn it immediately into a global business, building it from day one. And one of the proofs of that initial concept was that very early on, the company created a Swiss subsidiary to front the sales and market the idea as a safe way to share files, and that is something which people tend to believe if it is sold from Switzerland much more than if it is sold from
So
Hungary.
they were
So
tapping into the country image then for their business.
exactly, but the costs and complexity of setting up an office in Switzerland when you have actually almost zero sales or just a couple of hundred euros of sales seems like a complete waste of time and resources, but it was not waste. It was actually very much necessary for these young people to earn credibility early on with the product that they have been developing on the way. It was not ready from day one. It was a constant development, which then resulted to a solid business, which actually was recently purchased by the Swiss Post.
By Swiss Post, exactly. So it started with Switzerland and then ended in some capacity in Switzerland.
Exactly.
What's
So
the example of the other company you mentioned that it didn't
the
start from
other
global day one, but
the other company I would mention is called Utecas. It is a business which is now just starting from the end, is now the development team of Verizon, working from Budapest, a team of close to 100 engineers, um, really working for the global markets. What can you name as being global as Verizon? These people started to sell their solution only in California. Uh, and of course, these were not people actually living in the US, but I think what they did, they actually looked for the market that could grow the fastest and which is the most receptive to the development, the technology that they have. And actually, they were ready to move there.
okay.
And once they have proven the technology there, with certain applications that I won't go into now, but there were some very strong use cases in the US, which then resulted in a merger and then in a sale to Verizon.
Right. Okay, fantastic. Good examples for each of those approaches that I actually talked about in my presentation. Carolina, talk to us about what you look for when you're scouting for companies in Reactrix. Where does the ability and the willingness to go global play into the picture?
Well, I would say that at Reactor X, our top one priority is to have this approach. Well, I have the privilege to work with early stage companies, so sometimes they are coming with a piece of paper or let's say a little bit more. We need to discuss it through. We need to know that their perspective is global. Like we cannot see any other perspective happening. So I have to admit that sometimes we have some harsh discussions at the very beginning. We have interviews and we discuss the possibilities of joining Reactor X, and our top goal is to convince them, or at least to keep the thinking about scaling globally. So I would say like it's our checklist that we have to fulfill. Hopefully, the proportion of startups who already feel that they should go global is bigger and bigger every single year, but still is not 100%. So I'm just wondering, what's your perspective if you want to grow your startup locally? Because it's not the same as entrepreneurship in this traditional way.
Right.
But it's getting better and better.
Right. Well, I suppose it also depends on what your home market is. I mean, growing a local company in the U.S. is in
Or
itself,
China.
or China is certainly a pretty big market. Poland, within the context of Central Europe, is also a very big market, but certainly Hungary and neighboring, and you get into some of the Baltic countries. Obviously, you're talking about really tiny markets. So, in some ways, there's a clear requirement to grow global because otherwise, there's not much of a business there. Zsuzsa, if you think back about over the past 5-6 years, as you've accelerated your growth, what has been the biggest challenge you've had to overcome in order to create a global business?
Mhm. So in 2016, we launched a loyalty management platform that we have now, which is the product that we build and sell to our enterprise clients. And in 2020, we saw that it started working. We were around 30 people at that time, but our confidence was quite lacking in terms of pricing. But after a while, we built that confidence up. And I just talked to my co founder about this, and he just pointed out that 3 years ago, we sold licenses for like 4,000 euros a year. And today we are selling licenses for 300,000 a year. So our confidence boosted, our product
Well,
developed,
that's quite
and
a boost in confidence from 4 to 300,000,
yeah, that's
or 4,000 to
definitely,
300,000. And so
yeah,
what drove that
definitely.
change? Was it just a mindset difference?
It is both a mindset difference and also getting to know the market, because we started to adjust to this enterprise sales, and we learned what it takes not only to sell to the enterprise but to serve the enterprise. They need all these, they have all these security requirements, they have these support requirements, and we understood that we need to provide this and then we need to charge for this. So it came in parallel. But I think what really boosted our business is this new economy coming with the pandemic, because for two reasons. The first is that digital transformation speeded up. And even when talking to analysts at Forrester or Gartner, they experience the same thing. They say that the inquiries that they receive tripled. And actually, we are seeing this too, because by the end of this year, we will experience a 3x growth in terms of revenue. So it's really, really a big change. So the first is what I talked about, is the change in the environment. Everyone is rushing into digitalization. And the second thing is that the way people expect to buy technology changed, because with remote working, what the pandemic growth all over the world, there were no more in-person meetings, but everything happened through the computer, as now we are experiencing it in this very new format today at the Wolf Summit. And it really helped us, because our people were multiple places, but maybe not at the place where the client is. So, and we were doing this all the time, that we try to sell through computer, but we were in a disadvantage to compared to those larger competitors who had already offices in those cities where the clients were. So basically, this leveled the playing field, and we were able to prove that our product is better. And in this competitive environment, it proved to be better. And while some others went out of business, we skyrocketed.
Interesting. Peter, what about in your portfolio? Did you see this kind of positive bump in international business from your portfolio companies? Because obviously the COVID story is, difficulty and difficult reaching clients and all that stuff. But what Drew just said is quite the opposite. It actually accelerated their growth. What's the situation with your portfolio companies?
Different for every business. For example, the company Logischool you mentioned as one of the companies you helped with in our portfolio. For them, it was a shock to see that in roughly 15 countries, 14 of them closed all the schools from one week
Yeah.
to the other. About 14,000 students not go into the school to continue with the education. So there, to change offline education methodology to online education was remarkably fast, but a big challenge.
Yeah.
So there, to say that the pandemic helped would be an overstatement, I think.
Right.
If I take another example, a company called Data Art in our portfolio, a company which is doing software development outsourcing for large companies all over the world, for them, it boosted their sales. Actually, the demand to do more things online just boosted the demand on the customer side. So
Uh-huh.
the key issue with software development businesses, as we see, is hiring still to fill up the capacity side of the business with
Right.
the speed that the demand is growing.
Right.
And, another company I could mention that is operating a search engine that helps e-tailers to improve their search abilities on the websites of people, of e-tailers who have more than 1,000 um, product types in their portfolio. Again, it was a great boost because a lot of retail moved from offline to online. Therefore,
Right.
that was an increasing need. So I think it depends on the different industries, but overall, because we are in technology, it certainly was a boost rather than something that pulls back.
Uh-huh. Carolina, have you seen a change in the type of companies that are that you're seeing showing an interest in ReactorX? I mean, in this line, so companies that are more software driven, more online driven, rather than physically companies with physical products or physical locations.
So definitely, I feel like we've got more international companies coming.
Okay.
It was always our big goal to have international community inside every single batch, but it is increasing rapidly. Like we have countries that usually never would approach probably Reactor
Okay.
X. And they know that they can work really hard online, that they have the resources to provide good services internationally. So they want to scale internationally, they want to expand. And I think that this is the very big thing. Regarding this issue that we are right now discussing, I feel like I can agree with Peter that it really depends on the specific business industry that they operate in. We have some businesses that are coming because they are boosting. We have some businesses that are coming because they see the struggle, because their normal business model was mostly offline. These options were closed because of the pandemic, so they are approaching us to get some help. So these are different stories, but definitely because we are online, because they are online, you know, like they see that there is the potential that they should make use of.
I see. So in fact, it's not just the different types of businesses, but actually businesses located in other geographic locations are
Yeah.
coming to you because they can engage in the program without necessarily being there physically.
Yeah, it is also working very well for Reactor X. However, I do not like this whole online system of working always. Sometimes it's very helpful, sometimes not.
It makes you very efficient, as we discussed, right?
Yes, it's super efficient, but in the same time, well, it gives us less options for the accelerator to create community. It's not the same
Yeah.
community as before the pandemic. But I can say that, yeah, right now we have 15 countries that keep applying to us. Like these are representatives of different countries. It means that they see the potential in being international. We can invite more international mentors, international VC companies. So it gives us a huge potential as the accelerator to be efficient. Well, the community issues aspects are something else.
Right. So in fact, it's interesting because what you're describing then is that it's making accelerators themselves more global in nature, right? Because it used to be that they were very much focused on individual geographic areas, but now you're saying that it's opening up the world for different startups.
Definitely, yes.
Does that mean that you have to be much more competitive in your offer to startups in order to compete?
Of course, because right now the location, I remember the times, it was not that long time ago, just like 3-4 years ago, that you had to relocate as a startup to join an accelerator. It was like sometimes a top requirement from the accelerator for you to join. Right now, I don't see any program that is, you know, like it's okay sometimes to join offline, to be on site with some campuses, with some hubs, but usually it's all online, so you have the access to any accelerator in the world right now. So yeah, accelerators have very difficult task, you know, just to be competitive. And you know, I feel like it shows that you have to be efficient in your actions, because if you have international startups coming by, they expect you to help them to grow internationally. So you have to deliver this international growth for them.
Right. Zsuzsa, you know, one of the themes of my presentation was obviously being from Central Europe, physically located here. We're talking about an ecosystem that isn't necessarily at the cutting edge of startup growth, although that's changing as we're seeing increasingly more and more even unicorns coming out of the region. What do you think, being from Central Europe, almost independent of which country, but being from the region, how has it hurt your ability to build a global business, and how has it helped your ability? If you can kind of look at both of the positive and negative sides.
Yeah, sure. So when we founded the company, it was us four Hungarians founding it in London. So Antabu is a limited company in the UK.
Right.
And we created a Hungarian subsidiary where most of the Hungarian people are employed. But still, if you went to our website, you saw a lot of Hungarian faces. So
Yeah.
of the visual appearance, it was It was more like not a UK company. And then we, of course, needed to overcome this, and then we tried our best. But still,
But overcome means you actually saw the negative side of it. So yeah, you felt like you had to somehow mask your focus or your origins from Central Europe. Is that right? Or
exactly, because we always wanted to position Antavo as a UK-based company, which was
okay,
true in terms of foundation, but by the team, it was more like a Hungarian company. This is changing though these days, because these days we see it as a benefit that the development team of Antavo is still in Hungary. Because even though now we are more than 70 people from 12 different countries working remotely in the company, the engineering team still sits in Hungary. That's a decision that we've made. And that's a plus for those people, for those enterprises who, for example, want to keep the data in Europe, or there are sometimes these negative associations with outsourced centers in Asia and other places of the world. And for them, having the development team in Hungary is a plus.
okay. So generally speaking, you've seen the benefits of that. But from a market-facing standpoint, you really did want to become a UK company and be perceived as that.
Exactly.
Peter, how about in your portfolio? How have your portfolio companies dealt with this question of being from Central Europe versus maybe establishing an office in Switzerland or moving to the States? Where do you see that in the overall list of success factors for startups coming out of the region?
I think, again, I would just point to one of the issues that you listed in your presentation, which is the mentality and the communication in the company, the style. I think that's a remarkable difference. Probably the best ever comparison for us is that, the benefit of being there for 30 years is that you see many opportunities. And among those 50 investments we made, there were two companies that were developing online games. One with an American founder, company called Uproar. A guy called Mike Simon was the founder of that business. The other is a company that was called Triviador. That was both of them actually came up with a trivia game online, and one was manufacturing driven, and the other was clearly customer driven. And one became the sixth most visited site in the world back in 2000, and the other is not there anymore. Now you can guess which came from which style. I leave it with you to guess, but I think that was extremely important that actually the company that made it to be the sixth most visited trivia game in the world was originally designed as an online education platform. That was in the business plan. They thought
Right.
they're going to be sold to international MBA schools as the winning platform, because that was back in the 90s when Java was out. That was creating the possibility of doing interactive things on the net, including education as well as games. And there was absolutely no need for this business to stick to the original idea. If the demand was there to get a contract with ESPN, and they wanted to have a trivia game, they thought, can we do a trivia game? The guy said, no, it's impossible. And the founder said,
Sort of like my
you
engineering story at the
misunderstood
beginning, yeah.
something. You just misunderstood something. That's what you have to do. And the question is, when are you ready? And that's a completely different approach to when you're building a global business. You have to understand the market, and you have to control your back office. You have to control the engine room. You can't just buy sales, international sales. If you
Right.
can't bridge with the gene of the original business idea, it will never work. In an ideal situation, the founder is heavily involved in sales, and therefore this bridge is kind of burned into the genome of the company. But if you don't have that, then it is extremely important to build that bridge and to make sure that channel is working properly all through the growth.
Right. Well, and just to finish the story, Mike Simon would eventually go on to launch Log Me In, not Logical, Log Me In, take it to the U.S. Stock market and build a...
being a founder of EPAM, which is now 35 billion. So I think you guessed it right.
Yeah. So certainly a very big success story to come out of the region. Carolina, what's your view on the sales versus product argument? Are you finding that the founders that you work with are more product focused than sales focused?
At the very beginning, yes. And sometimes they just forget about the second part. And I have the struggle, not me in person, but also the mentors agree on that, that they do not value anything else than the product at the very beginning. Because at the early stage, you focus on delivering the best product that you have in mind. And then later on, you think of some other elements that will be required, like to be on the market. So we do fight with it, that's for sure. But again, I see that because the whole world is, like more and more global, like our communities are more global, we, again, perceive this as an essential part to look both sides, the product, the service that you provide, how you will do it. I definitely agree the communication that you will provide, how you want to be visible on the market. But I would say at the early stage, it can be a trouble.
So here's a question to the panel in general, whoever wants to jump in. So how do you change that? I mean, this is something that I've been hearing for the last 25 years, right? In Eastern Europe, you've got strong product people, strong engineers. You've got, the sales guys are in the US and the UK and so on. How do you create that sales culture in this part of the world so that it can compete in a meaningful way on a global level? Who's got an idea?
I think it's just very straightforward that, you need to make money somehow because you're running out of cash. So at one point you need to think of the sales. I also remember with our first products, publishing it and then opening it to beta without charging anything, well, so long ago. But at point we need pivoted to the loyalty management platform. It was there from day one, even though for a very slower or lower price than right now. But it was there, and we had all of our efforts focusing on selling it. And the product was even sales driven. So we developed what was needed. And I think we did it very well because we followed the lead of our clients. Of course, there are limits to that too. So you can't do everything that they request. You need to be sensible about it. But I wouldn't done it differently because following our clients made us develop the product that they really need.
Mm-hmm. Peter, what's your view? Is there a way to create a stronger sales-driven culture in this part of the world, or is this just something that's going to be here 50 years from now when I don't know where we'll be 50 years from now, but probably not on this stage, but somewhere else, talking about the future of startups in Central Europe? What's your view? Or is it always just going to be a marriage of different cultures as a requirement for globalization?
I think some kind of marriage is needed, but I'm positive that there is a change. Again, this 3 decades of doing this business helps to see that the first, let's say, 4 or 5 real big successes of Euroventures, NASDAQ IPO, New York Stock Exchange IPO, or the Warsaw IPO with an airline. Those were all driven by international people or expatriates moving into Central Eastern Europe. But more recently, looking at the last 10 years, we do have successes even at not New York Stock Exchange companies, but at really scalable $100 million businesses with local people. But those local people have been educated outside of Central Eastern Europe. So even if they were not born with these abilities, you can learn that, but you can't learn that here. I think you have to be inserted into those markets, and you have to compete with the local lions to become one of them, and then return and then start something here with the local talent, which is also needed because that kind of competitive advantage in your cost structure, in the creativity that is there in Central Eastern Europe, the marriage, I think, is key for success.
Yeah, well, I can certainly speak to that personally. Obviously, I was born and raised in the United States, but I've built my career in the last 25 years in Europe. you do really at a very young age in the United States, just through the education system, the environment, just learn how to present and sell in a good way, right? So it's just something that you're trained to do. I'm obviously at different levels with different levels of success, but it does start at a very early age, and I think that also there's this sort of positive mentality that you can do anything you put your mind to. Again, a very American thing, which I think is very valid in the startup world. So we've only got 5 minutes left, and I just want to make sure that I ask one question of each of you, and if you could just think about the answer in a moment. If you had 2 minutes with founder who looks like they've got a decent product, they've got the right attitude, they've got the right mix of skills and experience, and they ask you, what is the one thing I need to do right to become successful globally with my business? Literally one thing. What is it that you would recommend that they do or say or consider as they look to build a global business? Who wants to jump in with the first answer? Karolina?
I can start with some basics. I feel like it's still not the thing that startups think in the first place, to understand the market from different angles. Why the market? We have sometimes startups that make decisions of starting this new market, which is totally not, like, it's not a clever idea. Like, it's difficult, it's expensive. We had one startup from the pet industry that entered like London market, just like a first one, like not like based in Poland, just starting the London-based market. It was expensive. They say that it was like lesson learned for them, that this was not the right step. So you have to evaluate why this market, what's the reason of that. And understand the market in a meaning, understand what is there, like what competition is there, how to get ready for it, what your clients expect. So maybe some market research, maybe starting selling, maybe having some first customers that will advise you. So understand your market from different angles.
Okay, so first piece of advice is understand your market and drive your business and build your business based on what you're getting from the market feedback. Zsuzsa, what's your one piece of advice?
I would advise that start with the content and do it before you are ready. I think it's like a general rule in life, but maybe it's just an entrepreneur talking from me, just, starting it. And I think that we've done this very well at Antavo, that even before we had a product, we already positioned ourselves as experts and started to publish these articles, ebooks, and reports around the topic that we've been working on. And I think positioning yourself as an expert is a great investment, because people like all over the world these days start to research and start making purchasing decisions online. And if you are visible online because of the content that you put out, you will be visible for your potential customers. So I would say start with the content.
Okay, start with content, as in position yourself as an expert in your field, and that's going to draw in demand from markets. Thank you. Peter, what's your one piece of advice in this last minute?
Well, you gave a big challenge, but I think you described the person as one with the right abilities and the product as the right one.
Yeah.
So all I would say, think big and focus on it.
Okay, so think big. Great way to end our conversation when we're talking about building a global business. So I want to thank all of our guests here today for participating in this panel, and thank you very much for the audience for listening to my presentation and listening to the conversation here. Hopefully you've gotten a bit of inspiration and some relevant information to help you build a global business, and we look forward to seeing the outcomes and the successes of the startups who took part in today's audience. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Goodbye.